Gentlemen, this Red Gaming Cynical video. Let us discuss AMD's Mantle technology as well as other APIs and PC and console integration with them, at least according to DICE. Now, there have been an interview where Johan Andersson of DICE has been discussing this, and he's given a lot of information and his thoughts as well as DICE's opinions on the Mantle technology. Now, Mantle, of course, is going to be a low-level API which is released for the PC. The idea is that it will allow you to code to Metal. Now, if you don't know what any of that means, do not panic, my friend. We will indeed explore it in this interview. So, one of the questions that was given to Johan was basically, what happens if Nvidia and Intel say, you know what, this actually is working. You know, we see that, well, basically this is becoming popular with developers, AMD's Mantle is. So what happens if everyone decides to release their own low-level APIs? What goes on? Now, Johan says, and I quote, that even though Mantle, even though the work is being done by AMD to expose their stuff on their specific architecture and it's worked together with us also on the stuff we've learned from the next-gen consoles and just in general with our engine architecture. But it's not an API that is designed only for their specific GPUs. This is a thin and low-level abstraction over the hardware there, and it has to play nicely with everything that you have in Windows. Also, I would like to see other vendors supporting that. It's a bit of a tall order, and of course, everything still comes from AMD here now initially. But I think it's important to say there's no really technical reason that you need multiple sorts of low-level graphics APIs, one for each vendor. If it would happen, that would be for political reasons. You would have multiple ones that just can't all play nicely together, or they're not able to find a way to collaborate on this. That would be unfortunate, I think. Although, that said, at least in the desktop space, there are only 3 players out there, and we already support, I don't even know how many rendering backends we do have. It's 5, 6, 7 backends for something like that now. For us, supporting additional low-level graphics APIs, well, once you drop to that low level, it's not so difficult to support additional ones, especially if you already have some. That's not the way I would like to see it going forward. I would like to see that, first of all, that we prove out that Mantle actually works, and we deliver great performance with it, and we have a great trajectory with that. That's the plan that I would like, and for the upcoming titles, and do that together with AMD and just get it out there. Then we go wider with that and have the potentially very tough decisions with various IHVs and see we can find a way of essentially standardizing whether it's just Mantle, whether that's Mantle is just a part of something. I don't know. Foundation or standards body or other sorts of APIs in the future with some types of benefits or improvement that I don't know yet. Although Mantle is a really good design, I think, it is very well executed for all of those things, but there will be some tough discussions that we're going to have going forward, all of us together. Now, in my opinion, out of quote, just for a moment, this is one of the issues that's been going around. Now, obviously everyone knows what directx is at this point. I'm sure most of you are familiar with other little shinies, for example, OpenGL. Here's the thing, and there's always a thing. With Mantle, AMD have created it. So the problem with companies such as Nvidia, such as Intel, do they want to basically support and start pushing for political reasons someone else's technology? Now, Nvidia, I really wish this wasn't the case, but they don't work well with others, especially when it comes to sharing technology. We all know the story about hardware physics. In my opinion, Nvidia should just say, you know what, we made a mistake, we're going to just share the technology with everyone else, right? Even if the technology isn't quite as good with the AMD graphics cards. Let's say it doesn't perform quite as well because, you know, there are a couple of versions behind in the drivers, whatever. It doesn't matter. The fact is, at least start sharing it, because it's the only way the only way that you're going to start making something mainstream. It's a simple fact of the matter that you can't just expect games developers to program for, 40-50% of the market, whatever Nvidia have, depending on the generation, depending how popular that card is. So, it's like, okay, sometimes they do with, like, how it's meant to be played titles, especially. For example, the new upcoming Black Flag, Assassin's Creed Black Flag patch is going to add Nvidia hardware physics, and it's going to be amazing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It looks to be incredible from what I'm hearing, because it's going to just imagine real-time moving fog, clothing, and everything else in Assassin's Creed, which already looks gorgeous, but it's going to look even more so. The problem is just not enough games support it, and the reason is simply because Nvidia own this technology, and indeed it used to actually be fairly easy to get hardware physics working with AMD. What you could do, you would have to basically have 2 PCIe slots on your system. And then what you would do is you would have, say, whatever AMD graphics card you would like, and then you would basically buy a Nvidia graphics card, a cheap one. So, for example, back in the day, you could buy something like the GTX 460, or even a little bit cheaper, actually. Some people were getting like the 8800 GTXs, or the 8800s, or even the 8600s. And they would just use that purely for physics. Thing is, Nvidia then started to do stuff with the drivers, and I believe there's still a workaround. I haven't looked into this recently because I own a Nvidia card. I believe there is a workaround, but it's a real pain in the butt, particularly when you're starting to do updates. Anyway, I kind of went off the beaten topic there, but regardless. Okay, I know what you're going to say. That's good. What about DirectX? Does it have a prayer? Is it possible the DX12, whatever version, could just be re-engineered, or some other standard low-level API, for example OpenGL, could it be re-engineered to add exclusively these functions? Johan replies, I think we can go more and more in that direction. I'm not fully sure. There's also the question of time when you're able to actually, even if you wanted to go in that direction, when can you deliver that? Can everyone get on board and things like that? There's already an important component. Let's say if it was only DX that went sort of closer to Mantle, that would definitely be a good thing. But the rest of the ecosystem is based on OpenGL. So ideally, you want OpenGL to move in that direction as well, or OpenGL to become something more like Mantle on the lower level. I think that's really important because the future is not just DX. Sure, it's pretty dominant on the desktop, and we use DX variants on the Xbox One, but we don't use it on the PS4. We don't use it on the PS3. We don't use it on the iOS. This is going to take a while. We don't use it on the Android, the Mac. I'm not going to keep saying don't because we're going to be here all day, okay, guys? You don't use it on the Android, the Mac. We don't use it on Linux, and so on and so forth. He keeps going through platforms. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. It's just getting kind of annoying to keep saying that. But anyway, many of those other platforms are really important also, and that's where I think ideally I want to have the cross-platform API, so that's not tied to DX. Even though DX is today's most important API out there, and the one that most of our users are using by far, ideally I would like to see a solution that can work on both Mac and Linux, and in the future also in mobile platforms that are moving forward a lot. So even more constraining about CPU and efficient rendering and power efficiency and all of that. And this is actually, out of quote, this is actually a really good point, because a lot of people in the gaming industry, well, there's several trains of thought in the gaming industry. One, please God, let DirectX die. That's one theory. I mean, they just want it to be dead. They just do. There's issues with DirectX, with draw calls, non-standardization. For companies which want to start porting and pushing more the Linux platform, DirectX isn't exactly super duper helpful, honestly. OpenGL also does things such as tiled resources anyway, although it's called something slightly different. It can do virtual texturing, so on. Performance-wise, it's up in the air, right? Also, OpenGL does have some better backwards compatibility depending on the game. Not always. Primarily, however, honestly, most I think would like to see OpenGL start to push forward more. An OpenGL version is basically what the PlayStation 4 uses. It's not exactly OpenGL, but it's using a version very similar-ish to Mantle from what we understand, which of course is going to stand the PS4 and Mantle technology, in theory anyway, in good stead. I mean, Johan, for example, also points out that Microsoft, of course, have had DirectX working on Windows 8 tablets and phones, but look, the market share is tiny, and Microsoft do not have a history of sharing APIs, application programming interfaces, with the industry, and much less, and even less, than IHVs have. By the way, IHV means Independent Hardware Vendor, just in case you're not familiar with the acronym. And so IHVs have a better chance of working together with us developers and seeing it as overall cross-platform solution. A little bit difficult challenge overall, but we have to push for what we would like to see out there. Okay, so according to Johan and the Frostbite team, what would it require for architecture that is non-GCN, which of course is what Mantle's targeting, graphics core next, for example the Radeon 7000 series or the 2XX series, what would it take for those cards to utilize it? And would AMD decide to open it up? Because in various slides they have said that it is not platform specific. AMD have said that. Joanna said that Mantle requires a certain set of key functionality of the GPU, so it can't be supported on older architectures before the GCN architecture. The focus right now for Mantle is to finish implementation of the first version of it and get it out together with Mantle-based rendering backend in BF4. This backend will only be able to run on AMD GCN-based GPUs. Again, going forward, I would like to see a future version of Mantle support from more vendors, and that would be a discussion that would have to happen between AMD and the other vendors and us developers to figure out a way to make it happen. So, it's going to be a tall order, and in my personal opinion, is it's just a demonstration of the fact that the industry needs to work together. Simple as that. Because right now, everyone's trying to, of course, vie for their own little empire, which is understandable, but it's not necessarily the best thing for games development or technology. This is very similar to the Glide fiasco with 3DFX, and honestly, Glide gave a huge performance boost to 3DFX cards, the Voodoo's, but ultimately, developers just couldn't keep supporting it because as 3DFX started to lose market share, as for example Nvidia and ATI back then before AMD acquired them, as they started to become bigger, it's a simple fact of, well, we can't really support like a third or whatever their market share was at the time on exclusives, so they basically stopped to use it, and therefore Glide started to basically disappear. 3DFX started to lose even more advantage, and so on. And of course, we all know the story then of DirectX taking over and being even more, used than OpenGL, which wasn't really happening back then because Glide was basically an OpenGL wrapper. So, what's the story going forward? Well, ultimately, unfortunately, there's not much we can do as gamers. We can tell games companies and games developers that we really like Mantle, that we want better performance with the PC, and so on. Games developers themselves can, try to support the format, and AMD could try and take it off, but ultimately it's probably going to require a good deal of support from Nvidia a good deal of support from Intel, because remember, Intel's own GPUs now for the say Haswell are a lot more powerful than what they were. They're certainly nowhere near fast enough to be able to super compete, but for Mantle, it's also going to really benefit low cost, low power solutions or APUs as well. Because don't forget, in those cases, the CPU and the GPU just does not have super high-end performance. So if you can get, for example, just throwing a figure out there, 20-30% extra, okay, 30% extra on, say, 20 frames per second versus, say, a desktop 60 or 100 frames per second, isn't that great? But hey, would you rather have that, or would you rather not have that? I'd rather be playing at like 25, maybe 30, depending on, obviously, how good the API is and how good the GPU is, so on, then what I would be struggling at 20. Just for example, 30 frames a second is, playable. And obviously this is really going to depend heavily on a multitude of different things. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. It's been a bit of a speculative one, but kind of a fun one, I think. Anyway, I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.